reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, but ultimately the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me, I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me, you put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cap. Scandal now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two?
I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane. But smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong to utilities. It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
what are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like, they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with, like, hucksters and fraud, where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Like, they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX.
Wow.
Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance or wasn't a scam? I've said this before because I root for nerds to, like, be that successful that you're just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking. It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. It means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like, at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
Yes. You could hear even actually. Okay, somebody found out about this God mode, and so the lawyers how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, he blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer. In the terms of service, they said, results may vary. What's that about? Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology and they backed that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. There was already all this worry. In the past, that summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money.
Analogy for losing your house?
It's funny. Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I on Styx or something. Like, it was never – the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have – enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? You're might be one of the first trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur, they think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys.
Why the celebrities are important, and that's why
huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part, yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness, do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. After the fact, he's like he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? It just, he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have on and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could do down, because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
Yeah. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step, and at first it was like just me discovering, like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course, and then what? Well, middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then they have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
The money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like,
yeah.
or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to... There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
You know, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, you know, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. I really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, you know, sort of like, just like the, like, hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these like get rich seminars.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China. Like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here. Maybe that's a big deal. At the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me on. Let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, you know, we have some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Like I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Like, and you know, and that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cahotis, he's a famous short seller. It's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, you know, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. Or you were a grandma who just put 1 Bitcoin on there, or, you know, more likely the grandson, he treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was stuff. You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world? As
big as FTX, crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira. He thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
I service that said, you cannot move, like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people?
Figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO, like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, like, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that these exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way,
one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money. Located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States...
What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, you can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Find out like there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan Free Executives, Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Was a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that? Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? Annoying. So
we don't need that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded to their other friends. They're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people, Washington, and I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like, it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like so he called it fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled. It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they
do something like that? Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that success, 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month, 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. He cleaned up on all his own customers. Just basically taking their money, like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out to, like, if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. He's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys, and so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like, I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually gay. So, like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, you believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like,
I don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all, what was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. So are you going to make some money? And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's rich. Like, you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100. And that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like, yeah, tokens like is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin, then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I'm not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became an wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these, like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like this big mess right now. And we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene. But, right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over, like just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of shocking thing, and I think that shows like if you're running a shady empire, like who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in?
But I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people had
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this inevitable?
God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all, you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange. What they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't gonna fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. This stuff, and you start to have repeat occurrences. Like, I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago. I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, there were some margin trading accounts, and I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you, and they wanted who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? Like, how
something? Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why? Right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. The fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong, it's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like, we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give, really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal. And we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there. And all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like, everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So a person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
so he decides to donate dark to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, they bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names, and also he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal when to store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no
finance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. And like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know, which thankfully she did. And she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But his whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called... Actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. Fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do... I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used money and go start trading with it. Unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it. And that's where the disaster started. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange, they have a bank and they work with that bank, then they exchange. Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they like to get paid for.
All. And ultimately, one of the ways, like even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were like donating through them for like all these around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. Really, everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people notice, like, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like they had a Serum token, which they control most of. I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos, right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum?
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So
okay.
FTX was this crypto exchange and basically like, shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later, but you actually own a bunch. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any. So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, he was the most notorious and well-respected. Her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this one. He launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to. I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to I want to say something. But why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, the account. Fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured